Okay, I'm back as promised. Last time we talked about prokaryotic cells, which are the simpler cells. And now we're going to cover a bit about eukaryotes and then also what some of these, how some of these eukaryotes infect us. Because these are some of the organisms we'll start talking about. And don't worry, we're going to get into plagues. I know this is a lot of kind of biology at the beginning, excuse me, but it is important to understand how plagues infect us and how we respond to them. And it is a biology course. So, got to have a little biology there. Okay, so I told you that eukaryotes were much more complex than bacterial cells. And here you can see it. This is a eukaryotic cell. Don't worry, you don't need to learn all of this. You might have learned it in high school or in one of your college courses if you've taken biology before, but it is much more complex. So here's a bacterial cell or a prokaryote, and here's a eukaryote. So yeah, you can really see the difference between those, right? Yeah. Okay. So eukaryotes are much more complex. They do have membrane surrounding their DNA. So that's called a nucleus. They have internal membrane bound organelles. Remember, prokaryotes don't have any membrane bound organelles. They just have things sitting in the cytoplasm. And they also have just a chromosome sitting in the cytoplasm. The eukaryotes are much larger, so they're 10 to 100 micrometers, where the bacteria cells were like 1 micrometer, and they have a much more complex structure. And the eukaryotes are composed of algae, and the ones we're going to talk about later on are protozoa, fungi, helminths, animals, and plants. So a number of them. So they do have some similarities with prokaryotic cells. They do have glycocalyces, which help anchor animal cells to one another. And like our cells, all of our lung cells are anchored together. They glycocalyces also help to strengthen the cell surface and provide protection against dehydration, and they function in cell-to-cell recognition and communication. So very similar to prokaryotic, just a little more complex structure, but we don't need to go into that. They also have flagella, but in this case, it's weird. The cell membrane actually goes around the flagellum. So it like covers it and then it goes around the cell. So it's inside, the flagella is inside the cell. And then the flagella may be single or multiple, and they're generally found at one end of the pole, the cell pole, like one end, rather than prokaryotic where there's flagella maybe everywhere. And they don't rotate, where flagella and prokaryotes, they swim around like this. They just kind of corkscrew around, and that's what moves them. But eukaryotic cells, their flagella go back and forth, kind of like, oh, I don't know, what's this, a swimming, like a butterfly or something, how you kind of move like that. Another external structure is cilia. And let's get a picture of a sea urchin spermatozoa with the flagellum. And you can see it kind of undulating there, not doing the corkscrew movement that a prokaryotic flagellum would utilize. So cilia are shorter and more numerous than flagella, and they have coordinated beating, which propels the cell through their environment. So they might go like a wave, kind of, and that will help to propel them through their environment. You also might have cilia that are inside or on your mucous membranes, which includes like your bronchi, your esophagus, and some of those things. So these are hair-like projections, just like flagellum. They're much tinier, and they line the primary bronchus, and they help to remove microbes and other debris. So what they do is they coordinatedly sweep up, and they're sweeping junk up all the time. Things, dust you breathe in the air, pollen you might have inhaled, something you swallow from your nasal cavities, and they sweep it up. And actually, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. So what they do is they sweep it up so that you swallow it, not that you've swallowed it and then it gets down into your lungs. Hopefully that doesn't happen very often, otherwise you choke a lot. But if you sweep something up, it's got to go somewhere. And so it just kind of goes into the back of your esophagus and goes down your your gullet, goes down into your GI system, and then the stomach acid takes care of it in most cases. So eukaryotic cells, cell walls, fungi, algae, and plants do have cell walls, but animals have no cell walls. Eukaryotic cell membranes, all eukaryotic cells have cell membranes, and these cell membranes contain lipids to help maintain the fluidity or bendability of the cells, and it also helps to control movement of things in and out of the cell. So important to have a cell membrane. Eukaryotic cell structures, there are organelles within the eukaryotic cell. We're not going to memorize all of those, but basically they perform the functions of the cell. The translation is little organs, organelles. So basically here's a very basic eukaryotic cell. It has a cell membrane, it has cytoplasm, and it has a nuclear membrane around the nucleus. And that's where all the DNA is housed, in the nucleus. Cell biologists divide the eukaryotic cell into two major parts, which is the nucleus, and then it's the cytoplasm, which contains the organelles. So here's the nucleus. It's often the largest organelle, and it has a double membrane composed of two phospholipid bilayers. So it's a nuclear envelope, if you will. Like the prokaryotic cell has like a capsule or a cell membrane, has a capsule, then a cell wall, then a cell membrane. Well, this nucleus has a cell membrane, and the cell itself has a cell membrane. And the nucleus contains most of the cell's DNA, as you know. And then it also contains nucleoplasm, which is similar to cytoplasm in the larger cell or in the cell of a prokaryote. The nucleoplasm contains masses of DNA or chromatin or chromosomes. One or more nucleoli are present in the nucleoplasm, and RNA is also synthesized in the nucleoli. You don't need to know that. So here's the nucleus. There are nuclear pores, so substances can come into the cell, kind of like our brain, needs to have some things come in, but not everything come in. So the nuclear pore is a kind of a control mechanism for substances to come in or out of the nucleus. Here we have the nucleoplasm, which is kind of the lighter colored, and then the chromatin, which is the darker blue colored. All right, so now there's an interesting theory that has a good deal of people behind it, and it's called the endosymbiotic theory. And what it says is that eukaryotes are actually the product of two prokaryotes. So basically, one prokaryote ingested another prokaryote, and then that ingested prokaryote became an internal parasite. Both of them lost the ability to exist independently, and the larger cell then became dependent on the parasite. So there are structures in a prokaryotic cell. Once they got into the other prokaryotic cell, became the organelles that are in a eukaryotic cell. So for instance, there's mitochondria, there's ribosomes, there's all kinds of different little organelles that may have once been part of another cell. So anyway, it's an interesting theory and sounds very plausible. I don't know if anybody's proved it yet, but anyway, there's also a similar scenario for the origin of chloroplasts, which are in plant cells. So they have chloroplasts, which some scientists think were previously prokaryotic cells that were ingested by another prokaryotic cell, which then became a eukaryotic cell because it had all of those organelles in it. So here's the endosymbiotic theory. Basically, you have, in this case, you have a large cell that is ingesting that little bacterium, and then that's becoming a new cell. So just another depiction. We have on the left a primitive prokaryotic host cell, and then we have an invasion of bacteria into that cell, and then the bacteria turn into mitochondria, which is one of the organelles, and then we have maybe other organelles that have come in, and then that cell becomes eukaryotic, either as an animal, a fungus, or a protozoan, or it may turn into a plant cell that has chloroplasts that had a bacteria that turned into a chloroplast. Interesting theory. Who knows? We'll find out soon. All right, so there are cells of different infectious organisms. So viruses and prions are both acellular. So those mean the viruses just have a strand of DNA or RNA, nothing else. They might have a coating on it, but that's not any kind of function. That's just kind of like there for protection. And then prions are also acellular, and they are just a strand of folded protein. So they're nothing else, just a strand of folded protein. Bacteria, on the other hand, are unicellular prokaryotes. So they are cellular, and they share only a few cell characteristics with the eukaryotes. They don't have a nucleus. They do have the chromatin in the middle of the cytoplasm, and they have very few organelles, and those organelles don't have any membranes. And they typically have a cell wall. And in eukaryotes, only plant cells basically have a cell wall. The fungi do have a cell wall, but it's made up of chitin, a different substance. So protozoans are unicellular, and they are eukaryotic. Protozoa contain a very well organized nucleus, which is covered by a membrane. So obviously that's making them into a eukaryote. Protozoa are motile. They have flagella, cilia, and pseudopodia. That's like an amoeba where it kind of sends out a little cytoplasm leg, and then it kind of spreads there, and then another leg, other legs go out. Anyway, those are locomotory structures, and those are covered by a plasma membrane. So we know that flagella and other locomotive structures are covered by plasma membranes in eukaryotes. Okay. So here's a couple of examples of prokaryotes. Eukaryotes, protozoan eukaryotes. So despite their small size, they are complex. So you can see let's just take the paramecium, since I think most people are familiar with that. There are several organelles inside, and they have like a stomach. And so anyway, they're motile, and they have a nucleus. So those are eukaryotes. And all the other cells here are protists, and they are eukaryotes, although they're only single cellular. Then we have the fungi, and those are also eukaryotic. Most of these are multicellular. I remember I mentioned yeast, which is unicellular. And the fungi's walls are composed of chitin, which is a different subject. It is a polysaccharide, so that means multi-sugar. It's not regular table sugar, but it's a type of sugar. But bacterial cell walls are composed of mucopolysaccharides, which are lipids and sugars. So it's different. Fungi is just a polysaccharide, and bacteria are mucopolysaccharides. And that cell wall of bacteria is going to be important later on, because we're going to find that some drugs are able to kill bacteria based on the cell wall that humans don't have. So that's an important difference. Fungi are non-motile. They have a nucleus and also membrane-bound organelles, which does mean they are eukaryotes, and they're multicellular too. So then we're going to also talk about helminths, just a few of helminths. They're not cause for really any plagues or widespread disease in the United States. They are in other countries, and they may become much more common with climate change. But for now, they're not a real serious threat. So helminths are eukaryotic, they're complex organisms, and they are multicellular. And you can see the worms here. The top one is Ascaris, the middle one is Trichuris, and the bottom one is hookworm. We're going to talk about Ascaris and hookworm later on. We won't talk about Trichuris. That's the one that occurs in uncooked pork. So it's just not as common, I guess you should say. I could say. And these are single-celled ova or eggs of some of the helminths. So look a little different. They are microscopic, and we'll see them a little bit later. And then just another image, or talking about size again. I know I showed you the cells alive so big, but this is just another example, since we're talking about these organisms. The blue image is a raindrop. So, that's kind of small. You could see it, but it's still kind of small. And then the plant spore is the green that you see there. And then the fungal spore is the red. Then the bacteria is the kind of purplish pink. And then tobacco smoke is that tiny little blue you see there. And then the virus is the red that you can hardly see. So just imagine how many viruses can fit in a raindrop, or conversely, how many can fit in a sneeze with, some little droplets of mucus from your nose. Billions. So viruses are very tiny. And so that's why they're so easy to spread. I don't know if I told you this, but I love bacteria and I hate viruses. So just as a microbiologist, those are my preferences. Viruses, yeah, no, don't like them. And I don't like prions either. Anything zombie like, I don't like them. Okay, so a very short lecture, but hopefully that was informative. All right, thanks for listening.